Okay, I'm going to do take 2 on this. You'd think I'd have this figured out by now, but I was trying to do the Facebook Live on my laptop so that I had a little bit better of a, I don't know, backdrop and whatnot, but it was having some problems with audio, so take 2. Sorry for those of you who heard the first round and or saw the first round but couldn't hear the first round. So let's start over again and see if I can make some sense of this. So what I hope today is, in this midst of IEP season, is to share a little bit of some ideas of a way that you can look at more meaningful IEP goals that isn't in the traditional way of like, here's a tip or a strategy, but rather this idea that the questions that we ask can maybe lead to a difference in our practice. And then I'm going to completely shift gears and talk a little bit about some questions that have come up in the last few days by some colleagues in Iowa. So hopefully the sound is working and the audio is working, and for those of you who are busy at IEP meetings, you can watch this back later and kind of see what's going on. So, okay, the first thing I want to share with you is 3 questions, one that you can ask yourself, one that the team can ask themselves, and then one that a program or agency or district can ask, in an effort to write more meaningful IEPs, okay? So the first one is one that is promoting your self-awareness, and that we know leads to higher emotional intelligence, and so the higher our emotional intelligence, hopefully the better that we participate on IEP teams and write IEP goals. So the first question you ask yourself, and this all comes from the Courage Way, and I put in kind of the show notes some of the sources of things I was going to talk about today. So the first question is something like, am I listening for the sake of understanding someone else's perspective and to understand their stories? So this question that we ask, not about what is your resources, what are your priorities, what are your concerns if you're an IFSP or IEP meeting. It's not about what's your vision for the future. Do you want to come on Tuesdays or Thursday, morning or afternoon? It's not even about compliance in terms of, does this child, this is an IEP worthy goal. But this question I want you to ask yourself at your next IEP or IFSP meeting is, am I listening for the sake of understanding the perspective of others and their stories, okay? The second question that a team can ask, and this is for my friends like Barb Avila and Marcia, they know all about the positive emotional attractor, but at the start of an IEP or IFSP meeting, I want you to ask, what has gone really well that we can celebrate? So before you start thinking about transitioning the child to kindergarten, reviewing the results of the latest assessment, looking at the progress that you've graphed all the last quarter, I want you to ask a question that will trigger the positive emotional attractor of the team by saying, what has gone really well since our last meeting, right? Since our last IFSP or IEP meeting that we can really celebrate. And that's a way to start thinking about more meaningful IEPs that aren't just about the form. And then the third question that I want a program or an agency or district to ask, and this is maybe not the time to do it because everybody's just trying to survive, but if we really want to thrive and write meaningful IEPs, we need to think about what do we need to stop doing, what do we want to continue doing, and what do we want to start doing. So I want you to take a big global look at your IEP process, from how you schedule them, to who's there, to where they're held, to the chairs that you sit on, and I want you to think about how can we ensure that this process is more meaningful for the families and educational team members, and ultimately that it promotes better outcomes for children. So ask, what can we stop doing? What do we want to continue doing? And what do we want to start doing? Okay, so that's my first part of today's Facebook Live, was just to give you some tips to not only survive IEP season, but to thrive in IEP season. And so those are those 3 questions. 1, to raise your own emotional intelligence. Are you really listening deeply in a way that is for the sake of understanding and hearing the stories of others? The second question is, what's gone really well that we can celebrate? And the third one is, what do we want to stop doing, continue doing, and start doing? Now, part 2 of the Facebook Live. So this question has come up in a lot of different ways in the last couple of weeks. So I thought, well, let me just jump on and kind of tell you what I'm thinking about it. So it came about when we were talking, actually, when Barb and I had shared with a team in Iowa a goal that we wrote about social reciprocity. And people started asking, well, how do we graph that? And how do we measure progress over time? And what's the task analysis of social reciprocity? And then simultaneously, people started to say, shouldn't we measure the level of independence the child has with this particular outcome? So the goal aside of social reciprocity, let me just talk about task analysis and levels of support or levels of independence for a minute, and why and when I would include that in the IEP process, but why I'm not really a big fan of them. So in the truest sense, a task analysis is taking some sort of chained event or chained task. We always think of things like washing our hands because it's really easy for us to see. So there's a series of steps you need to go through to get through the chained things versus a discrete skill, which is a single skill. So we have these chained skills that go together, and then we have a discrete skill that is a single one. So a task analysis in its truest sense is this idea that we are going to break things down into the steps. We're going to do one step, next step, third step, okay? The second thing is levels of independence. And levels of independence, we all know that's from like that full-on support. Usually we didn't give kids like hand over hand all the way to quizzical looks. But the intention of levels of assistance is to really reduce the errors in which a child is learning a skill. And so we give them more support. It also can be for kids with more severe disabilities who really require a great deal more of support to be able to perform a skill. So because both task analysis and levels of independence are methods of measurement, they can be part of the IEP goal because we know the ABC formula, antecedent, behavior, criteria. And the criteria is how am I going to measure the child's performance over time. So because task analysis and levels of independence are methods of measurement, you might think, this is part of my IEP. Well, maybe. The question is still, what is keeping this child from accessing, participating, and making progress? When we peel it back, what is the dimension of behavior that we care about? What matters? And so when we peel back around levels of independence in particular, we very, very quickly slip into how. Meaning, we're going to do some sort of response prompting procedure. So any of you who have the Blended Practices book, I'm on page 152. And so in this chapter, we talk about specialized instruction. And this is really, you can think of as specially designed instruction or highly precise or intentional instruction. And that would sort of suggest an IEP-worthy goal, but not necessarily. It just means the child has an intensive need where we're going to really think about, is it discrete behavior that we're teaching or a chained behavior? See, I'm back at the behavior, but I'm going to slip over into how am I going to support and scaffold. Anytime I start talking about support and scaffold, I'm really talking about my how and not my what. So I don't want people to too quickly get into writing IEP goals that are written as a task analysis or of a levels of independence, because we haven't changed the what, we've just written a chained set of skills, or we've written a discrete skill with different layers of how. So response prompting procedures, there's at least 6 of them, and one of them is to be able to give levels of assistance. And so we know that we have most to least prompts, we know we have system of least prompts, all of those things. And so we want to very strategically use those strategies when we know what our what is. But it doesn't, out of the gate, the best way to think about peeling back and getting to what is the what matters doesn't help really to think about the child needs lots of support to the child needs less support. All novice learners likely need a lot of support. Then as they get stronger, more proficient, then we can wean them and do that graduated removal of our support. So, not sure if that makes any sense, but let me kind of circle back. When you're thinking about trying to find your what, anytime you start thinking about what am I going to do, you've probably slipped over into how, and you've lost your way a little bit. So when we think about task analysis, probably still about the what, but it's really just a series of discrete skills chained together to perform some sort of end result. So it's not so much that we've thought about what is IEP worthy or what's keeping the child. It's more about how will I teach this child in a way that's scaffolded and supported. I'll teach them one step, add the second step, add the third step. Oh, do you see how I just slipped into what will I do? I will teach the first step. I will teach the second paired with the first. I'll teach the third step paired with the second and the first. It's all about how. Similarly, when I think about levels of support, you're going to go, oh, I'm going to give hand over hand. I'm going to give just a little bit of a nudge on the elbow. Okay, but that's still what you're going to do. We haven't peeled back to figure out what is keeping the child from accessing, participating, and making progress. And really, levels of support is a prompting procedure that is really embedded into system of least prompts and most to least prompts. And that's all those specialized instructional strategies that we talk about in Chapter 7 of Blended Practices. And you know when you've gotten to Chapter 7, you're really on the other side of that coin talking about how, not what. So while task analysis is a method of measurement and can be part of your criteria, it's not your B. It's not the behavior. And while levels of independence can be your method of measurement, it is also not your B. And so we don't just change the number of tasks, and we don't just change the levels of support, and that finds our IEP worthy goal. It might be the criterion part of an IEP worthy goal, but we still haven't done due diligence to find the B of what matters. So I don't know how long I went, but pretty long. Thank you for my good friends for hanging out with me and joining me today. I'm fine to stay on in case people had questions about what I just rambled about, or if they had questions about the IEP framework and formula for writing meaningful IEPs, packages. There's a basic, a premium, and an elite, and then we now have some licenses for coaches and faculty and stuff. But if you're just joining, you might want to listen back because I offered 3 questions that you can ask about your IEP process that hopefully will help you get to more meaningful IEP goals. And then I broke down why task analysis and levels of support isn't the what part of a meaningful IEP. It might be part of your criterion, but it will rarely be the behavior. Only mostly when children have more severe disabilities would those become the dimension of the behavior. Really, if you start finding yourself wanting to talk about task analysis or you want to think about levels of support, you've probably eked over into how, which is about your specially designed instruction and not about what's your what. So there you go. That's what I have for you this Thursday. If there's any questions, you can just post them on Facebook and let me know. And feel free to share this with others. And thanks again for my friends in Iowa who raised the questions about why levels of support and task analysis aren't the IEP worthy goal that they thought they might be. All right. So thanks everybody, and have a great rest of your week. And I hope that you not only survive, but you thrive in this IEP season.